Thank you all for coming tonight, and before I read, thank Noreen for inviting me here to read, and Owen and David for agreeing to make this great panel. I'm going to read from the middle of my book, just a short section. I don't believe there's anything really necessary that you need to know, but if there is, I'll stop and explain. That Sunday, in October of 1972, my father appeared as a guest on Meet the Press. I have a recording of the broadcast downloaded from the web. For whatever reason, my copy is without sound, an error in the transfer from film to tape to the tiny file at home on my computer, streaming now in my office as I write this, flickering, mute, everyone long dead but him, everyone a ghost but my dad. His hands are locked at the knuckles behind the folded tent of his name tag. Unlike the other guests, my father has no middle name. I've seen his birth certificate, held it in my hands. That section is blank on account of his father, my namesake, who believed that in America, brevity won the day, that two names bested three. Consider the founding fathers: Adams, Madison, Franklin, Washington, Jefferson, no middle names. So for him, just Arthur, Celtic for bear, Gaelic for stone, perfect for my father, the stone bear. And then Wise, that name. He'd worn it better than I had. To me, it was a lark, as ridiculous as anything, a source for mockery. How could the name Wise ever be uttered without it sounding like a joke? This isn't early color television, but it might as well be. There is the saturation of his hair dyed, singed almost by an overhead top light, black at the part, blacker than in 1947, the black hair of a boy, but on the body and face of a 55-year-old. There is the rainbow of the peacock feathers on the NBC logo, the red matching the red of my father's pocket square. There is the glint in the diamond of his tie bar, a few $1,000s there. There is the pinched flaw in his Windsor knot, immaculate blue silk, one of a closet full, $50 each. Beneath the flimsy desk, he's likely to have on something Italian, black Bruno Mali, $1,000 new in New York. What would have become known as the O.J. Simpson shoe? These were his favorites. There is the way his hands quiver as Lawrence Spivak begins to ask him something, his shirt cuff lifting, nerves on national television, just a trace of sweat on his hairline. No French cuffs today. But there's the watch, Cartier, possibly the same one he tried to give me that day in Blue Point. He seems just as imposing to me on screen as he did in reality. Of course, he looks just like me. At a certain point, his reputation should have faded. Men, even great men, have only a short moment when everything, luck, skill, ambition, works perfectly in concert, but not him. On tape, he is quite a good deal younger than I am now, but still, your father is always older, always. The picture cuts now to a photograph of a parked airplane. The edit is jumpy, the image coming on, then going away, then coming back, the V-hold straining. It's unclear to me if this was how the image was broadcast, or if this is just how it was recorded, digitized, streamed to me. Again, the plane, stationary on a nondescript runway, a big jetliner with a row of windows closed to the sun. A logo on the tail fin tells me that this is probably Sunbeam Air Flight 81, takeoff out of Denver, 11 a.m. August 1972, estimated arrival at LAX 1:03 p.m. The plane was found in pieces in the Rockies, the cockpit 6 miles from the tail. His nickname has become Arthur Crash, but it might as well be Arthur Cash. His partner Robert Ashley once wrote to me that if I were to look outside in an average day, an average clear day where you could see jets coasting by at 40,000 feet, and I picked out just one flight, any flight, like a kid picking just one card from a street magician, there was a good chance my father was making some money off it, either because of insurance or some judgment on the airline, because they had asked him to make sure they couldn't be sued the way Boston Airways was sued. Every jet wake, cash. Every sonic boom, cash. Every landing smooth or not, cash. Thanks.
Likewise, my thanks to Noreen and the Center for having us, and for Stuart and David helping form this panel. So I usually read a scene from my book about a guy jerking off, but it's not a father-son situation, so I'm sorry to say, sort of. Now that I see that I missed an opportunity there, but so I'll just read this little part. Chronologically, this is the earliest father-son scene in the book, so I don't think it needs an introduction. On a cold, eye-wateringly sunny Saturday morning in the winter of 1989, Sam Dolan was alert for trouble. As the F train shuddered along the elevated tracks into the borough of Brooklyn, he sat on a vibrating plastic bench and squeezed his hands together. His father loomed above him, gripping a crossbar, grinning around at all the other passengers. Booth's excitement put the boy on edge. They were on their way to visit Orson Welles' nose. The boy, age 10, had long ago come to regard his father as a cause of some concern, and that day's journey south to Brooklyn's Museum of Cinema Arts seemed tailor-made for mortification. Booth was at his worst in public. When Booth spoke, his voice had a way of expanding to fill every inch of available space, even if that space was a parking lot. It wasn't a voice, it was a voice, like the everywhere at once voice that aliens broadcast from their spaceships in movies when they threatened to vaporize the United States. Any person within cannon range could hear it when his father said, "Samuel, will you stand by here, or would you prefer to accompany me to the pissoir?" At 6'6" and approximately 250 pounds, Booth didn't blend in anyway. Sam's father didn't walk. He waited, upper body tilted 5 degrees south of perpendicular, shoulders leading to split through gales no one else could feel. But to Sam, an unassuming boy genuinely comfortable only in the company of his mother and his plastic figurines, the noise and size of his father were not the worst of it. They were, if anything, merely aggravating factors to the real problem, which was that Booth was so weird. The train swept into a curve and everyone shuffled 2 steps to the left. A dollish, steel-haired man in a neat brown suit and 2-tone shoes lost his balance and stumbled into Booth's gut and bounced off. Booth embraced him in a one-armed hug before he could fall. "Steady, young fellow, I've got you." "Oh, thanks you," said the dollish man, regaining his feet. "Thanks you, mister." "You are perfectly welcome." Booth reached out and straightened the man's lapel. "I'm accompanying my son to see Orson Welles' nose." He swung a massive bearded smile onto Sam a moment before the boy could make a point of peering intently to the right, down the subway car where a lady sat slumped against the wall, asleep inside a tall fur hat. "Oh, that's interesting," said the dollish man. "They got the man's nose?" This question came from a disbelieving woman in a silver jacket, holding onto the crossbar a few steps down the car. "How's that?" Booth's chuckle peeled off the steel walls of the car. "It is not Orson Welles' actual nose, I assure you, madam. It's just a mold. Welles would have filled it with latex in order to create a theatrical nose, like this." Booth plowed a hand into his trouser pocket and came out with a yellowish blob. He quickly massaged the prosthetic back into shape and held it for the woman to see. Bridge, tip, nostrils. "You always carry a nose in your pocket?" she asked. "Yes," Booth drew back slightly. "Don't you?" A dozen or more of the train's riders were laughing as they went rollicking into another curve. Sam thought he could feel his soul clenching up, like toes in a pair of cold, wet socks. Thanks.
I want to thank Doreen, Owen, and Stuart for doing this. I thought maybe Cats in the Cradle should be playing while Harry Chapin. And now that Bloomberg's not our mayor anymore, which is, he was kind of our dad, and now we've kind of got our stoned cousin. I'm all for it, man. Totally for it. I think it's great. No more Daddy Bloomberg. But I'm going to start off reading something, if I can find it on my phone. It's not like an email from my father or anything like that. It's something that Kafka wrote to his father, and it's pretty great. And he wrote a 65-page letter to his father that he never sent. And it just has this one little, the best part of it being this, one little paragraph. "Your extremely effective rhetorical methods in bringing me up, which never failed to work with me, were abuse, threats, irony, spiteful laughter, and, oddly enough, self-pity." Like that. And the whole letter, which I was just looking at today, It's very strange and long and interesting. And it tells you a lot about where Kafka was coming from. So I'm reading from Anne Sons, a scene in which a father, who is this kind of unknowable, famous writer in the mold of Philip Roth and J.D. Salinger, is brought his two sons back together again to try to get them to know this third son, who is the product of an affair, who's 17 years old. And the father, the great writer, has finally got the two older boys who are in their 40s together, and he's now going to tell them some interesting news. Imagine a vortex. They're in his study. Imagine a vortex, slow turning but gaining steam, drawn together by the communion of lungs. Richard and Jamie sitting on the couch, breathing in the mildew of wet in battle against dry, while their father sighed near the window, with more pose than purpose, rocking as if the expanse of Central Park were his linen wall. The sons keeping silent behind him, waiting for him to say something and give center to this respiring tension, but also glancing around the room, always a mystery growing up. Other fathers leaving in the morning for Midtown or downtown, but their father simply walked down the hall and shut that always forbidding door, usually only working at night, which added to the mystery of his secret lair, his bat cave, his fortress of solitude, where he tried saving a world he himself created. Richard and Jamie sometimes setting their alarms for past midnight so they could sneak downstairs and kneel by the door and hear the booms and pows and splats of the typewriter and envision the battles within, surely more than words put on paper, surely something epic at hand, though the truth was that their father could only relax in the early morning wilderness, comfortably alone and industrious, unlike the daylight hours where real people had real jobs and he could suffer through hateful meaningless, I am nothing. The definition of himself growing wobblier by the instant, the sun a jaundiced eye, you are nobody. The people on the street living a life he could only imagine, both alien and common, reaching all the way back to when he was a boy, peering from the window in his bedroom and layering upon himself specific detail after specific detail. I am wearing one red sock, one blue sock, earmuffs, a baseball mitt for a hat, reciting you are old, Father William, until he was certain, or almost certain, that he had reached a level of absolute distinction, and he could unwind himself from the burden of everybody else. This was the same sort of freedom he found when sitting at his desk in the middle of the night, never suspecting that his sons sometimes listened by the door, their entry forbidden without a knock and a very good reason, though 11-year-old Richard once slipped in while his parents were eating dinner, and he hid behind those emerald curtains, the velvet now moldy green, determined to catch his father in action, with Jamie given the task of engineering a bad dream and rushing downstairs at midnight to pound on the door, thus allowing Richard to escape. And all evening long, Jamie practiced his nightmare about quicksand and sinking into a below-ground world, hoping he might impress his dad with his imagination. But when the time came, Jamie slept through the alarm, or so he claimed, and would still claim sitting with his brother and waiting for his father to finally say something. But really, Jamie wanted Jamie wanted Richard to stew behind the curtain, more interested in his own passive effect, already a shady witness at 9, and the well-thought-out plan turned into a boy, trying his best to remain still. And even now, Richard could detect a tremor in the curtain as his father stood a few inches from the past and stared at the crushing blueness of the everyday world, broken up only by the clouds approaching from the west, like a posse kicking up dust. Jamie decided to toss in a few words, testing the conversational current. "What is this, Dad?" he said, arms expressing the shambolic state of the room. "The office of Dorian Gray?" His father turned from the window, always with a clever comment. "I try. You try, huh?" His father smiled like a man watching a captured animal go free, all because of his benevolence. You ever wonder why Oscar Wilde used picture instead of portrait? Because portrait seems more appropriate, sounds better too, at least to my ears. The portrait of Dorian Gray. Those matching or sounds. Maybe the painting is a portrait, but the story is a picture. Or maybe you want to do the correction in our heads to misremember the title and get it wrong, and getting it wrong actually get it right. That crafty subtextualist. Another glance toward the window, giving the boys his nose-strong profile. I've been thinking about my last words lately. Of course, old Oscar had a bunch of them, all excellent, but who knows what kind of condition I'll be in. Quite unhappy, I assume. In pain, delirious. I don't trust myself to come up with something that's both extemporaneous and memorable. So let me tell you now in case I forget. Okay? Here it is. Be kind, rewind. Laugh if you want, but I'm serious. I think it has a nice touch of the levitas. Nonsensical and yet still sensical, vaguely Hindu. I always love those signs in video store windows. Funny how a phrase can outlive the technology. A Christian sentiment, I suppose. Be kind, rewind. Now imagine what follows is my last breath. Andrew limped over to his desk and shook 2 Vicodin into his palm. What kind of pills are those? Richard asked. Sorry, I'm dead.